My husband didn't come home until nearly midnight on a Tuesday in February, which wasn't unusual anymore. What was unusual was the smell, not perfume. I trained myself to look for that. This was something colder, the sharp, particular smell of a notary office, ink and paper and something official. I noticed it the way you notice a loose thread on a sweater. You tell yourself not to pull it. I pulled it. We'd been married for 16 years. His name was Callum, and when I'd met him at a conference in Ottawa, I was working in financial compliance. He was presenting a session on corporate restructuring. I'd thought he was the most focused person I'd ever seen. He had a way of listening that made you feel like the only person in the room. I later understood that this was a skill, not a feeling. We built something real, I thought. A house in Kanata, just west of Ottawa, with a birch tree in the backyard that our daughter Ivy used to climb when she was small. 2 cars. A joint account with automatic transfers every month. 17 years of tax returns filed together. I knew his SIN number the way I knew my own birthday. So when I started noticing things, I told myself I was tired. I was always tired. I worked long hours at the firm. He travelled for work, consulting contracts, mostly in Toronto and sometimes Calgary. It made sense that we'd drifted a little. It happens to everyone at this age, I thought. 41, the years where you stop expecting fireworks and start being grateful for ordinary Sundays. The Tuesday he came home smelling like a notary office, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I pretended to be reading a report. "Late meeting?" I asked. "Long drive back from Toronto," he said, pouring himself a glass of water without looking at me. Traffic on the 401 was brutal. "On a Tuesday night?" "Construction. They're doing overnight work." He went upstairs. I sat with that answer for a long time. The next morning I checked the 401 traffic reports for the previous evening on my phone. Clear. No construction. No incidents. I told myself there could be 100 explanations. I told myself that for 3 more weeks. It was our accountant who cracked it open, and he didn't even know he'd done it. Every March, Callum and I met with our accountant, a careful, methodical man named Stuart who had done our taxes since 2011. That year, Stuart had sent an email asking Callum to clarify a few capital gains entries, and he'd CC'd me out of habit. I almost deleted it, but one line stopped me. The disposition of the Elmgrove property. I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't know what the Elmgrove property was. I waited. I didn't say anything to Callum. I went to the kitchen and made tea, and stood at the window looking at the birch tree, which still had snow around its roots. I thought about how to do this carefully. I'd spent 15 years working in compliance. I knew what it looked like when numbers were hiding something. I knew that the worst thing you could do was move too fast. That evening I opened our shared Dropbox folder. We used it for household documents, insurance, warranties, the children's school forms. Callum had stopped uploading things to it years ago, but our original agreement was that financial documents went there. I scrolled back, nothing about Elmgrove. Then I logged into our joint account. Just the normal one, the one we used for household expenses. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just looking. The amounts going out every month to something labelled CRL Property Management had been there for 8 months. I'd walked past them a dozen times without seeing them, the way you stop seeing a piece of furniture. $412 every month. Consistent. Automatic. I wrote the amount down on a piece of paper. Then I went to bed and lay there next to my husband and said nothing. My sister Wendy has always been the one in our family who says the thing no one wants to say. She's 5 years older than me. She lives in Gatineau, and she's been through her own version of this. Not infidelity, but a slow financial betrayal from a business partner that cost her 3 years and most of her savings. When I called her the next Saturday morning while Callum was at the gym, I didn't give her the whole picture. I just asked her, casually, what she'd do if she found a property on a tax document she'd never heard of. She was quiet for a moment. "I'd hire someone to pull the title," she said. "It's public record. You can do it through the province." I thanked her for something else and ended the call. That afternoon, I submitted a title search request through the Ontario Land Registry for every property associated with Callum's full legal name. I found 3. Our house in Kanata, a rental property in Kingston that we'd bought together in 2018 and that I knew about, and a condominium on Elmgrove Avenue in Ottawa's Westboro neighbourhood, registered in 2022, owned jointly by Callum and a woman whose name I didn't recognise. I sat with her name for a long time. Petra. I said it out loud once to no one. I want to be clear about what I did next, because it matters. I didn't drive to Westboro. I didn't call the number I eventually found online. I didn't send a message. I didn't confront Callum. I had this one instinct that was louder than everything else. Document first, react later. It was the compliance officer in me, maybe. Or it was the fear of being wrong. Or it was the knowledge, somewhere deep, that if I was right, I was going to need everything I could get. I opened a personal email account on my phone. I subscribed to a title monitoring service so I'd be alerted to any changes on the Elmgrove property. I photographed every document I could access: Stuart's email, the monthly CRL payments, the title search result. I put them in a folder on my personal Google Drive, which I'd logged into from my work laptop so Callum couldn't access it from our shared devices. Then I started paying attention differently. Callum left his phone on the kitchen counter when he showered in the mornings, which he'd done for years. I'd never touched it. I started noticing when he got texts, not reading them, just noticing the frequency, the time of day. He got a lot of text between 8:15 and 8:45 in the morning, right after Ivy left for school. He always put the phone face down after glancing at it. I started checking our Roger's account online. We were on a family plan and I was the primary account holder. The detailed call logs were mine to access. I'd just never looked at them before. The same number appeared almost every day, sometimes twice. From a 6113 area code, local, Ottawa. I ran the number through a reverse lookup service I found online. The name that came back was a business, Petra Halvorsen, registered massage therapist, an address in Westboro, right around the corner from the condominium on Elmgrove. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes. Then I went inside and made dinner and helped Ivy with her chemistry homework and watched TV with my husband as if the whole world was exactly the shape it had always been. It took me 6 weeks. 6 weeks of paying attention quietly, building a picture, not pulling the thread so hard it broke. I found out, through a connection at work who used to work at a title company, that the Elmgrove condo had been purchased for $487,000. Our joint savings account had shown a large withdrawal in September 2022, one I'd noted at the time as investment transfer, because that's what Callum had told me it was. $200,000. The rest must have been financed, in both their names. I found out that Callum's consulting schedule in Toronto was less consistent than he'd claimed. I cross-referenced his calendar, to which I still had viewing access through our shared Google Calendar, with the detailed call logs. On days he was supposedly in Toronto, the 613 number was active early in the morning and late at night. Local calls. He wasn't always in Toronto. I started keeping a log. Dates, times, amounts, distances. I'd done this kind of work professionally, tracking discrepancies, finding patterns in numbers, but I had never once imagined doing it in my own kitchen at midnight, after my daughter was asleep. There was one evening in late March when I nearly told him. He came home with flowers, not roses, just daffodils from the Loblaws on Hazeldian Road, the cheap kind in cellophane. He handed them to me and said, "I saw these and thought of you." It was such an ordinary thing. I held those flowers and felt something in my chest go very still. I put them in a vase. I made dinner. I kept the log. By the time I called a lawyer, I had 37 pages of documentation. I found her through the Law Society of Ontario's referral service, a family lawyer in Barhaven named Constance, who had 22 years of experience and whose assistant told me on the phone that she was very thorough. I needed thorough. I brought everything. I sat in her office on a grey Thursday afternoon and laid it out. The title search, the call logs, the account statements, the calendar cross-references, the CRL property management payments, the notarized deed. Constance read through it methodically without saying much. When she finished, she looked up at me over her glasses. "Have you spoken to your financial institution?" she was asked. "Not yet." "Good. Do nothing until we talk to them together, and I want you to open your own account this week. Personal, not joint. Move what you're legally entitled to move. I'll tell you how much." "What about the condo?" I said. "He used our joint savings for the down payment." She made a note. "That's a significant matrimonial asset issue. We're going to want to address that carefully." I nodded. Then I said the thing I'd been holding since February. "He doesn't know I know anything." She looked at me steadily. "Good. Let's keep it that way for now." Constance explained the process in terms I already understood, which was a small mercy. Under the Family Law Act in Ontario, matrimonial assets are divided on the date of separation. Anything Callum had moved, transferred, or acquired secretly could still be relevant to equalization of net family property. The $200,000 from our joint savings, used for the Elmgrove down payment without my knowledge or consent, was recoverable. She also told me something I hadn't considered. Because Callum was a registered consultant and the CRL property management payments might be routed through a business account, there was a possibility of additional financial structures I hadn't found. She suggested I speak with a forensic accountant. I went to see one the following week. His name was Robert, a small, quiet man who worked out of an office near City Hall and whose entire manner suggested he had seen, professionally, every financial arrangement a human being could devise to hide money. He was unsurprised by everything I showed him. "We'll subpoena the records if it comes to that," he said. "But let's see what we can trace first." What we traced over the following 3 weeks was that CRL Property Management was a numbered company registered in Ontario in 2021, with Callum as sole director. It had a business account. It had made, in the past 2 years, expenditures totaling close to $60,000 on furniture, on property taxes, on what appeared to be a vehicle lease registered in Petra's name. $60,000 from our money. Robert laid this out on a spreadsheet with the calm efficiency of someone arranging library books. I stared at the numbers and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not rage, exactly. More like the feeling of solving a problem you'd been stuck on for a long time. The answer was exactly as bad as you'd feared, but at least now you knew the shape of it. There's a detail I keep coming back to, and I'm going to tell it because I think it matters for anyone who's ever been in a room like the one I was in. 3 weeks before I filed for divorce, Callum sat down at the kitchen table one Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and said he needed to talk to me. Ivy was at her friend's house. The birch tree in the backyard was finally starting to bud. He said he'd been unhappy for a long time. He said he didn't know how to tell me. He said he needed space to figure things out, and that he'd been seeing someone for about a year, and that he was sorry, and that he thought we should probably separate. He said it like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed in the car. I kept my face very still. I thought about the 37 pages. I thought about Robert's spreadsheet. I thought about the $200,000. "How long?" I said. "About a year," he said again. He looked at the table. "Just one person?" He looked up. Something shifted in his expression. "Yes. Why?" "I just wanted to understand," I said. He nodded. He looked relieved, which told me everything about what he was expecting from me. He thought I was going to cry. He thought I was going to ask him to stay, or maybe ask him to go, and either way he thought this conversation was the beginning of something. It wasn't the beginning. We were already most of the way through. "Okay," I said. "We should probably talk to lawyers." His relief curdled slightly. "Of course," he said. "We can do this amicably. I don't want things to be difficult." "Neither do I," said. That was true. I genuinely didn't want things to be difficult. I had done everything I could to avoid that. I had spent 4 months making sure that when the moment came, the difficulty would be manageable, well documented, and legally sound. The divorce proceedings took 14 months. I won't pretend it was clean or easy. There were days when Ivy came home from school quiet in a way that broke something in me, and I had to hold that separately from everything else. There were evenings when I sat in the kitchen after she'd gone to bed and felt the specific loneliness of being in a house that used to mean something different. But the documentation held, every piece of it. The $200,000 was treated as an unauthorized withdrawal from joint matrimonial assets and factored into the equalization payment. The CRL-numbered company and its $60,000 in expenditures was unwound, with Callum responsible for repaying those funds to the marital estate. The Elmgrove condo was sold. Callum's half of the proceeds went toward what he owed me. Petra's name appeared in various filings. I never met her. I didn't need to. She wasn't the problem. She was just the evidence of one. Constance, my lawyer, was methodical and precise, and worth every dollar. When we signed the final separation agreement, she said, "You came to me more prepared than anyone I've seen in 22 years. I didn't know if that was a compliment or an observation about what kind of year I'd had, maybe both. Callum lives in a rental apartment now, in the Glebe. I know this because Ivy visits him on alternate weekends and sometimes mentions it matter-of-factly the way teenagers mention things, without a fact, just information. He's still consulting. I don't ask about Petra and Ivy doesn't offer. I still work in financial compliance. I still drive past the Loblaws on Hazeldean Road where he bought those daffodils. I still have the birch tree. What I learned from this, and I mean really learned in the way that sits in your bones and not just your head, is that paying attention is a form of self-respect. I had stopped paying attention for a long time, not because I was naive, but because I was tired and because it's easier to not look at the thing that might break you. I understand that impulse now better than I ever did, but I also know what it cost me. If you're watching this and something feels wrong in your own house, in your own numbers, your own silences, your own Tuesday nights, I'm not telling you to panic. I'm telling you to look. Pull the thread carefully, but pull it. The shape of what you find is better than the shape of what you've been not finding for months or years. The birch tree in the backyard put out new leaves this spring, first time I've really noticed them in years. I noticed them. The birch tree is what I keep coming back to. It was there the whole time, through 16 years of mornings, through every season I stopped noticing. I'd walk past the kitchen window, and it was just a tree, part of the background, something I'd long since stopped really seeing. That's what happens when you go on autopilot inside your own life. You stop seeing the tree. You stop seeing the numbers. You stop seeing the small wrongnesses that accumulate quietly in the corners of everything. What I had to reckon with after all of it, after the title search and the call logs and the spreadsheets and the 14 months of proceedings, was that the problem hadn't only been Callum. The problem had also been me choosing for a long time not to look. Not because I was foolish. I was never foolish. I worked in compliance. I noticed discrepancies for a living. But there's a particular kind of exhaustion that sets in after enough years, and it tells you that looking closely at your own life is more dangerous than staying comfortable. It tells you that not knowing is a form of peace. It isn't. It's just a delay. What I learned, and I mean learned in the way that actually changes how you move through the world, is that doing right by yourself requires a specific kind of honesty that most of us avoid. Not honesty with other people, honesty with yourself. Callum lied to me for years, but I had also been lying to myself every time I saw a strange charge on the account and thought, it's probably nothing. Every time I noticed he'd put his phone face down and decided not to wonder why. Integrity isn't just about what you do when you're watching. It's about what you do when no one is. I had to ask myself, if I knew the truth, would I act on it, or would I fold it away somewhere quiet and keep going? The moment I decided I would act, that I owed it to myself and to Ivy and to the 16 years I'd invested, everything shifted, not emotionally. Practically. I got methodical. I got careful. I put one foot in front of the other, and I documented everything because that's what integrity in action actually looks like most of the time. Not dramatic, just steady. The intelligence part, and I say this not to be proud, but because I think it matters, was knowing that acting fast would have cost me everything. The compliance officer in me understood that you don't move until you have the full picture. Constance said I was the most prepared client she'd seen in 22 years, but what she was really seeing was someone who had turned grief into precision. The gap between discovering Petra's name and filing for divorce was 4 months. 4 months of paying attention, building a record, speaking to the right people in the right order. That gap was where I protected myself and my daughter. And then there's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. The stamina it takes to keep going when everything in you wants to stop. There were nights in that kitchen after Ivy was asleep, when I sat with the spreadsheets and felt the loneliness of it so completely that I almost closed the laptop and walked away. But I didn't. Not because I was strong in some cinematic sense, because I had decided that I owed the next version of my life more than I owed the comfort of not finishing. Callum made his choices over years, and those choices had weight. They accumulated and eventually they landed. Exactly where choices like that always land. Not because the universe is keeping score, but because actions create consequences, and hiding something doesn't make it weightless. It just means you're carrying it somewhere no one can see until it drops. I still drive past the Loblaws where he bought those daffodils. I still have the birch tree. This spring I actually looked at it,